I'm excited to chat with Danielle Massi on the Awaken Feminine podcast. Danielle is a Master Shadow Work Practitioner, best-selling author, motivational speaker, and CEO of the Wellness Collective, a holistic healing space in Philadelphia. Her signature shadow work program, the Create Your Light Academy, has helped thousands of spiritual women unearth, remove, and heal unconscious blocks that are causing disconnect between their mind, body, and energy. Danielle is also the founder of the Selfish Philly Conference. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And the creator of the Shadow Seekers certification, and has written and been featured in numerous publications, including Shape Magazine, the Huffington Post, and Buzzfeed, just to name a few. And is also a frequent guest on major news outlets and high ranking podcasts. And I know she has so much love and wisdom to share with us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited for our conversation. And you're joining me from Philadelphia in the US. I'm in Perth, Australia. So we're like opposite time zones here. I think you're probably 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I am. And
Yeah.
it's funny. I've done so many, I think I told you this, I've done so many Australian podcasts and things recently. And you guys have a bunch of different time zones. And sometimes the things that I do are like 6 a.m., sometimes it's 10 a.m. It's wild. And it's fun to be able to connect with you guys. I love Australia. Now I have places to visit and crash when I come out there.
Yep.
Really connect in.
Yeah. Whenever you're here, hit me up. I'll take you around. Be
Sounds good to
awesome.
me.
So, Danielle, before we dive into our conversation, I always like to ask my guests this question, and that is, what is your definition of an awakened feminine?
So for me, the awakened feminine is someone who's balanced, because I think obviously with shadow work, it's really important for me about finding balance between dark and light. But I think that goes into everything, where when we think about femininity and really owning our power, it's not just softness. It's about recognizing the strength that we have and not being afraid to wield it, to really step forward as leaders in that creative, soft, beautiful way that makes us feel like everything clicks into alignment.
That's such a beautiful definition. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Danielle, we're going to be talking about shadow work today because that is your specialty. And I don't actually know much about shadow work. So today's conversation is really going to be me just asking you questions purely based on me and my curiosity and my intuition so that people, our audience can learn more about what shadow work is and, you know, and then really going from there down whatever rabbit hole we're going to go. So
Well, you are going down a rabbit hole when you do shadow work.
yeah, I figured that because I hear the word shadow work so much, but I haven't myself done anything, shadow work myself. So first of all, do you mind sharing with the audience what is shadow work?
Yeah, this is so important because of exactly like you said, we hear the term shadow work. We hear it on social media. We hear people talk about their own personal practices, but no one really defines it. So the exact definition of shadow work is the traversing into the unconscious mind. What that means is that we all have stuff that we bury. We hide things from ourselves. And beginning in the 1800s, Carl Jung, who was a famous Swiss psychiatrist, started studying going into that unconscious space to pull things out and deal with them. Because our brains and the way that they work naturally want to hide some things from us. Our brains are constantly taking in information, and it can't all stay in the conscious mind. We'd be overwhelmed constantly by the number of things that are there. And so some stuff gets pushed out. And what we want to do with shadow work is we want to intentionally and purposefully pull those things up slowly to heal them and release them so they're not weighing us down.
All right. So, because I think when I hear shadow work and when people talk about it, it seems to be like going into the shadows, like the darkness. So,
Mhm.
and from what you're saying, yes, it is kind of going into the subconscious, but not exactly the darkness like people explain. Can you like talk a bit about that?
Yeah, there's a little bit of science here that helps people understand exactly what it is and why we do it. There are three levels to our consciousness. We have the conscious mind, which is the stuff that we're all aware of. We have the subconscious, which is the stuff just below the surface. This is where your behaviors, your personality traits, your automatic things that you do every day without thinking, they all live there. The level below that is the unconscious mind. And this is the shadow. And the unconscious houses anything that is like the junk closet area for the brain. So a lot of stuff that is dark ends up there. We're talking about your traumas. We're talking about the embarrassing moments from your childhood. We're talking about the things that are really heavy in that way on you. So that's where shadow work gets that reputation. But it's not exclusively those things. It can also be a lot of stuff about your own power, moments that you've forgotten about, because just as readily as the brain is to say, let's not remember this trauma, there are a lot of moments of strength from your own life that you've disregarded, moments where you've excelled at something and you blow it off because you feel like, it doesn't really fit you. People tell you that you're not good enough. So I need to take this moment and kind of cast it away and forget about it. That stuff lands in the unconscious too. So when you've removed a lot of the traumas, a lot of the heaviness, you can see very clearly all those moments that are your power and your strength and those things that make you an awakened feminine leader, but you can't access them until you do the shadow work. So it's harder at first. I'm not going to lie. It's not a super pleasant experience when you first begin, though a lot of people find it to be very cool because things like past lives will slip through and you'll see all that cool stuff. But when you do get past that, it is the most empowering thing you can do for yourself, and you feel amazing every time.
Thank you for explaining that and really talking about that. It's not just all the dark things that we bury in and we don't want to see. It's also like the power.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's so many times when people do such great things and they're like, oh, no. It wasn't that great,
We do that constantly. And I worked as a psychotherapist for over a decade in private practice before really getting into shadow work and making that my specialty. And I would see people do it all the time. These moments of resilience, those moments of strength, we write them off because they don't fit the narrative of our brain that we're unworthy, we're not good enough, we're unlovable. And it just depends. Everybody's a little bit different. And based on your experiences and how your brain has wired itself, because it's like a fingerprint, everyone is a little bit different, you're going to hold on to certain moments and disregard others. And then they go into that shadow, that junk closet of the brain. And it just piles up and waits for you until eventually it starts flowing over and you start having anxiety. You might have depression. You might just feel like your body's dysregulated. You might have illness. So we want to get to it before any of that can occur, so you can really get rid of that stuff and tap into all that strength that you already have.
That's beautiful. I want to ask you, so you were a psychotherapist for a decade before you jumped into this shadow work. What made you decide to go into this, I guess I want to niche this,
It is kind of niche. Yeah. I think so. It was a long journey. And the very short version of it is that I had been on the way to burnout for a long time. I was slowly making myself sick. I was having a lot of physical symptoms, things like shingles, which shouldn't show up until you're like an older person. Some people never get it. But if you're young in your 20s and you're getting it, it's because of stress. And I was writing off those warning signs and pretending they didn't exist. I was working from like 9 a.m. until 9:30 p.m. And I had 2 kids and a husband. And I got cancer. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, that was a turning point for me. That was like a very abrupt, dark night of the soul where I couldn't keep existing the way that I was, because I knew that stress is the number one cause of any illness, especially cancer, because it causes an environment in your body where cancer can thrive. So when that happened to me, I had to really take a good hard look at my life and go, what did you do? Like, how did you get here to this moment? And that was when I really found shadow work. It's something I'd known about. I learned about it in my undergraduate courses studying psychology. I taught shadow work, believe it or not, at Penn State University during abnormal psychology classes, because we went through all the greats, the Sigmund Freuds, the Carl Jungs, Erik Erikson, all those old white men, because they were the only ones who were allowed to do anything at that time. And I knew in theory what it was, but in practice, I had no idea. And so it was calling to me. And I was like, you know what, let me just give this a try. And I found a woman in the UK named Alison Kelsey. I talk about her a bit in my book. And Allison was a shadow worker and also, like me, a licensed psychotherapist. And she took me on the wildest ride of my life and taught me everything that I know, not just about myself, but also about shadow work. And then I just picked it up from there and just committed myself to this practice, because in about 3 months' time, I did what I was trying to do in 10 years of therapy before that.
Wow.
And it's wild. Every client that I had from my past life as a therapist who has since come to me for shadow work, we've solved things in 1 to 2 sessions that they were coming to see me for 8 to 10 years for. And then they get mad at me. Like, why did you drag me through all that therapy if we could get to it that fast? And I'm like, I know. I didn't know at the time. If I did, I would have done shadow work with you first. But that
Yeah.
was how I found it. And I've never looked back. And now I've written a book about it. I speak about it all over the world. It is my passion. It's my fifth love, because I have my kids and my husband and myself and all that stuff. But it is just one of the most important things to me. And I hope that podcasts like this help other people find it and utilize it, because it's powerful.
Yeah. Can you share with us a bit about what it looks like to do shadow work?
Absolutely. So shadow work can look different for different people. The main theme is that we want to access the unconscious mind, not the subconscious, because that's too shallow. And we're not actually going to create neurological and physiological changes from the subconscious. At best, we're making some behavioral shifts that we hope over time stick. So anything that's going to get you to the unconscious. But the way that I do it and the way that I teach it in my book is through what I call the shadow seekers method, where we're going to meditate to the point where we access what are called theta brainwave state. And when you're there, it's like the exact brainwave pattern that you're in when you daydream or when you're drifting off to sleep, but you're still awake. So you're fully aware. You're not asleep. You're not hypnotized. You could get up and take a phone call if you wanted to. But you're in enough of a calm, relaxed space that the door to the unconscious mind is open. And once you're there, we set an intention about what it is that you're looking to see. So let's say that you're someone who feels like they can't use their voice. Then every time you want to speak up, you freeze. You really stop yourself in those moments. We set the intention to see when that started, the first time. And then we get pulled back to whenever it was. The unconscious will take us right to the moment. And you'll see yourself maybe at 2 years old and you're getting ready to sing in front of your family and it's a holiday and everybody's listening and your older sibling comes over and pushes you to the ground. And you feel like you are worthless and like nobody wants to hear your voice. And that little moment, teeny blip, we're talking about 5 seconds of your life, has changed the way that you see the world. It's changed the way that your neural circuits lie in your brain. It's changed your physiological reactions and your emotions. And that moment, if we can heal it, which is what we're going to do with shadow work, by altering the way that you see it now as an adult, through changing the physiological reactions, through changing the emotions that you have about it, through changing the way you think about that, we can change it for good, so that it no longer becomes this vice grip on your voice. And instead, we can focus on the resilience that you had in that moment. We can shift your viewpoint. We can show you all the times that your voice has been really powerful and magical. And when we do that, you don't carry around that weight anymore. And I use the voice one because for women, this is something that happens so often for us. We're very often from a young age told that our voice doesn't matter in some way or another. That is just one example of 1,000 ways this could happen. It could be a male parent, which was the case for me. My dad very often made me aware of the fact that women were not the leaders, men were. And to him, I say, fuck you, because now I'm out here leading like crazy. But I had to do the shadow work to be able to see that. And also for women, we have, through our bloodlines and our ancestors, years of feeling like we have that oppression on us, like we can't use our voices and they're not important. And that stuff carries down through our bloodlines, through epigenetics. Our DNA literally changes like a light switch. It's flipped on or off. And so if we can go back and heal these things, we can change our lives in an instant.
Wow. I was just like mind blown with what you just shared. So when you go back to the instance, that changed everything. Do you go back to heal it from like an adult perspective where you can actually see, do you change it from that perspective, or how, like,
We actually want you to be in your body then. So it's not really like looking at it from a third person. It's like accessing a memory and changing how you felt then. It's hard to explain, but here's the science behind it. And you'll see with shadow work, there is definitely a merger between science and spirituality that overlaps entirely. There's a system in our bodies that keeps us at a certain pace. It's called the subconscious feedback loop. And it's kind of like our body and our energy's thermostat. There's 4 pieces to it. There's our experiences. So what we take in with all of our senses, what we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we touch, what we smell. We have our emotional reaction, which is just chemicals firing off in the brain. We have the message that's sent down with those chemicals to the body through our physiological reactions. So our heartbeat, our breathing, the tension, cloudiness, where oxygen and blood are moving to in the body. And then finally, we have a thought that comes up from our gut. Our thoughts actually originate in the stomach, in the gut, not in our brains like we think that they do. So our thoughts are also another chemical. And so that's the last piece of the puzzle. Our experiences, our chemical reactions, which are emotions, our physiological reactions, and then the chemical reactions that form thoughts. And those 4 pieces loop together to reinforce experiences. So if you were 2 and you went to sing in front of your family and your sister knocked you over, the immediate thought at that age, because your emotions are at a point where they're not well formed, you only have access to what are called primary emotions. So anger, sadness, joy, fear, it's pretty basic. So in that moment, you feel sad. And the sadness comes from feeling like you couldn't speak. And so now any moment that you feel an experience that looks like that, so maybe the same smells in the air, maybe it is the feeling of someone physically touching you for that push. Maybe it's the feeling of getting up there to open your mouth and at that moment being shut down. Maybe it's that fight or flight response that your body kicks into. Doesn't matter which of the 4 it is. If any of those 4 pieces are triggered, your brain then goes, oh, we have a loop for that. We already have a neural pathway that is created for this moment. So let's just continue the loop. We know that sadness leads to these other things. So let's just make her feel that now. And so the chemical reactions start. That chain begins. So when it happens from that root point, whatever it is, any moment that you have, let's say you're 12 years old, you're graduating from middle school, you're valedictorian, they want you to make a speech. And you go to get up on the stage and you're like, absolutely not. Like, I cannot speak to these people. You've been stressing about it for weeks because nobody wants to hear you speak. And it starts, and you're just in that active stress mode for like a week or 2 leading up to it. And then you tell them you're not going to do it. And you give them a copy of what you would have said and let somebody else read it. And it becomes a poem by this person. Or we're going to do a reading from Danielle. And this is what she would have said. She's sitting right over there. Everybody claps. But you still feel it in your body. You can't speak. And it follows you because now we reinforce that loop from your childhood. It's happening again and again and again and again, over and over again. So with shadow work, we want to go back to that root moment. And we want you to see it exactly as you did the first time, which is how our memories exist. You are in your physical body. You are 2 years old. You feel what you felt when you were 2. It might not be an 11 like it was when you were 2, because as an adult, your chemical reactions have adjusted a bit, but it might be an 8. And when you feel it in your body, you feel that feeling of the hand touching you. You feel that sadness wash over you in that moment. You feel the eyes of every adult in the room looking at you with pity. And in that moment, you're right back there. And what we want to do is we want to take that same subconscious feedback loop and tweak it. So we work with the breath because that's the easiest way to interrupt it. If you're in fight or flight, your breathing is shallow. Your shoulders are going up and down. Blood is rushing inwards towards all your internal organs and away from the extremities. Or I'm sorry, it's the reverse. Blood is rushing to your extremities away from your internal organs. And as this happens, as you're going through it, the breath is what's pumping it. It's pumping adrenaline and cortisol through your body. We want to stop the adrenaline and cortisol. And the way that you do that is by altering the breath. if we can get you to breathe really slow, big, deep inhales in through the nose and out through the mouth, like leading up to that point, during it, and afterwards, you're interrupting that feedback loop. We're essentially taking one of those four pieces and we're removing it and going, we're going to break this chain. So the loop can't start then. There's a missing piece. It can't connect to the other items. And so from that space where you're seeing the moment, but your breathing is really calm, you're not in fight or flight, you're in rest and digest, you can feel different emotions because now the same chemicals aren't going to pump through the brain. And there's not going to be the same message up from your gut through the enteric nervous system. So you get to choose. What do I feel like thinking in this moment? I could think my sister was being a little bit of a-hole, but she was only 4 at the time, so I can't be that mad at her. And I could think, oh, it's kind of cute. Like this moment happened and like we were trying to figure it out and whatever else. And we have an awesome relationship now. So from that perspective, you are actually changing how this memory is stored in your long-term memory in your brain. And when we change it there, it has a ripple effect. Those neural pathways that we were talking about before, they're like a highway system for your brain and everybody's are different. We're essentially getting rid of the old ones and creating new ones in that moment. And if we're getting rid of old ones that have been reinforced over and over and over again, but we just got rid of it, now when you have an experience where it's time for you to use your voice, your brain's like, wait a minute, we don't have a neural pathway for that anymore. How do we want to feel? And you have to choose in that moment what you're going to do differently. So I know that that's a lot of science to throw at you guys. I literally spent 200 pages breaking this down in my shadow workbook that you guys can get on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. But that's the broad overview. There's so much science behind this that shows that we can change your life for good, for the better through this process. And it's amazing the results that you see.
Yeah. Thank you. I love everything that you've just shared. Ex-pharmacist here, so I love science.
So you get it.
Yeah, so I totally get it. I want to ask you, were you spiritual before, or is it something that you've now just kind of after the diagnosis that you kind of you started combining the science and the spirituality into your work?
Yeah, it actually is like a reverse bell curve for me. So I was very spiritual as a child. My grandmother was a spiritual healer, and my parents were very afraid of her. They thought that what she was doing was like dark magic. They didn't know what it was. They didn't understand it. Now, as an adult, I know it was energy healing, and she used frequency waves to help heal people. But what she would do is she would take a piece of their hair and she would use these machines. They look like something out of like the 1960s or 70s. They were wild. She would take the hair, she would put it in the machine, she would program it, and then she would send healing energy using your DNA somehow, which is why she needed the hair. And she would heal people from things like cancer, lupus, MS, things that doctors couldn't figure out. And I watched her do this for years, and I was thrilled by it. And I was a very spiritual kid. I was able to see spirits very clearly. It was never something that was hard for me. I could astral project, which I didn't know what any of that was. And my parents were freaked out because they didn't want me to be like her, because they felt like she was a social pariah. We lived in the Bronx, New York. Like it was just not something that they felt comfortable with. So they kept me away from her, and we tried to shut it down. And they talked to me all the time about how hard science is what matters. It's the facts that matter. So when I went to college, I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I went for psychology and cognitive neuroscience and was getting all my prereqs for like pre-med. And then I worked at a mental hospital in Brooklyn for a few years as an intern and realized that was not at all what I wanted to do. I wanted to talk to people. So I became a therapist instead, got my master's degree. And it wasn't until I got myself into that diagnosis and hit that rock bottom where everything I'd been repressing within the unconscious mind, the astral projecting abilities, the ability to see spirits and talk to them, and came rushing back so fast. It was like it never left. It kind of smacked me over the head. And when that came back, it was like, what have I been doing all this time? I spent like 15 years denying this huge piece of who I am and my own experience. But I think a lot of us, and especially in our age range, have a story like that. where you have imaginary friends and you don't realize that they're actually spirits that you're talking to. And then your parents get freaked out. Like one of my students sent me a video this morning of her daughter talking about the man that comes into her room at night. And she describes him as being like a wispy cloud, but he's gray. He's got these kind of features. And they just bought the house and someone died in the house. And she's describing exactly what the guy looks like.
Oh, gosh.
I think kids are so connected and adults are freaked out. I think it's going to change with our kids, like our generation having children, because we're just not the same. And then, Gen Z is wild. So it'll go even further than that. And it'll be like we're having group seances and kind of like let it all hang out. But I do think that we're healing on that front generationally. It's getting.
Yeah, I love that because, our generation definitely was still like a very taboo topic. And, now it's like, oh, let's go or woo. and bringing,
I've had mother-daughter groups. Mm-hmm. I've had mother-daughter groups and shadow work with me.
That's awesome.
We're changing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, because I really love how you combine the spiritual with the science so that, there's always the people that are very science and they just refuse to look at anything that's spiritual. And then vice versa, it's like all spiritual, then there's no grounding. So what you're doing is really bridging that gap, and so that both parties can go, oh, okay, there's something for all of us. And we can now see the other side of it and go, oh, right, okay. So I really love what you do. Something that came up as you were talking before about changing the DNA, I just wanted to ask you a bit about that.
Yeah.
So we were saying, epigenetics, things get passed down, and when we have trauma, it can, kind of flick the switch and change our DNA. So when you do the shadow work and we do the healing and all that, does it switch again?
Yes, it does. So with epigenetics, if anybody is unfamiliar, it's just the study of our DNA expression and how it changes as we go from one generation to the next. And this field of study has happened because of things like noticing that identical twins can look different when their DNA is exactly the same, especially if they grow up very differently. Like if there's an adoption and they grow up in two different parts of the world or two different homes, because it makes no sense. The DNA is identical. The children should look identical, and yet they don't. We can see things as different hair color, different height. One can be severely overweight while the other one is very fit. There's just so many variations of this. In fact, I actually had a pair of friends who I played soccer with growing up who were identical twins. One had blonde hair, one had brown hair. One had hazel eyes, the other one had brown eyes. They were slightly different heights, like 5'4" and 5'2". One of them was really built and thick. The other one was so skinny that I think a stiff wind could blow her away. And it was fascinating to me. I used to ask them all the time, like, are you sure you're not fraternal twins? Because you don't look alike. And that always stuck with me. With epigenetics, what we're looking at is how our DNA expresses itself. And so if everyone is passed down a set of DNA, think about it almost like a ball rolling down a hill. If you roll a ball down the hill, it's not going to take the same path every time based on the experiences. So like where the hill has bumps, where there are ridges, where there's areas where there's drop-offs, these things are all going to impact the course of the ball as it rolls down the hill. So no two balls will ever roll down exactly the same. Things like intense anxiety in mothers while children are in utero can impact how DNA expresses itself. And what epigenetics has found is that a lot of DNA markers are like a light switch where they can either be flipped on or flipped off. And things like stress, nutrition, environment, these things can all switch these pieces of DNA strands on or off. And this is where we see things like generational trauma, where if we have parents who, for my own family, my great-grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and one of them had children. So if she's very stressed out from everything that she went through, rightfully so, and then she later gets pregnant, she worries about bringing another Jewish child into the world. And her anxiety becomes very intense. And now she's not sleeping. Her eating is impacted. Financially, she doesn't have the resources she would have had beforehand because everything was taken from her during the Holocaust. So nutritionally, she's not having a diet that's helping support a healthy fetus. And so we're going to have all the DNA markers for those things flipped off. Now that child is born, and that child is now born a little bit differently than they would have been otherwise if they had a really healthy in utero environment where nutrition was really good. There's no anxiety. Mom's got like the headphones over the stomach playing Beethoven to the baby. It's just very different. And so the child who's born to that Holocaust survivor then grows up differently. Maybe there's more fear. Maybe there are some weaker links in their genetic chain that make that person more likely to develop things like stomach issues, which is something that whole line of my family has. Different forms of autoimmune GI issues. So we're talking ulcerative colitis and things along those lines. And it just gets passed down from generation to generation until somebody decides to do the work. And they get in there and they do some shadow work. And they start to reprogram that DNA and go, let's switch this off. Let's deal with the root of the anxiety. Let's see where it stems from and how it shows up in my body. And when that switch happens, the DNA marker now switches into the on position. And that doesn't get passed down anymore from generation to generation. That's the definition of healing generational trauma, ending generational curses, all these things that we talk about in the spiritual community, which are things that have existed forever. We know native cultures, indigenous cultures have been doing this for all of time. But now at least we have a little bit of science to back it up to go, oh, here's what's happening. Now we understand why. And we can see the efficacy of it all.
I love listening to you talk. You're so knowledgeable and you explain it in such an easy way for people to understand. So it's really cool. And, after talking to you and listening to you explain what shadow work is and everything, I have to say, I've actually done shadow work.
Just most people have. You just don't know.
I'm like, oh, okay, right. That shadow work. That makes sense. So what I'm doing is shadow work.
I mean, I told you earlier, there's like different forms of it. Like even going to therapy can be a form of shadow work. Plant medicine can be a form of shadow work. Journaling can be a form of shadow work. It just depends on how you do it, what makes you comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because whenever people talk about it on social media or, it seems like it's this big thing that you do, this ritual. So for me, that's what I had in my head going, I've never done shadow work, but after listening to you, I'm like, oh, right. Okay. That makes so much sense. So thank you for being able to explain it and share it. So people are like, oh, right. That's what it is. And obviously you have your special way that you do it through your sessions with you and how you teach it. And, you've helped so many people to uncover and, break that unconscious loop that you talk about. So that's really cool. I just love it. I've lost my train of thought like I usually do. Questions that I had to ask you, but I've totally forgotten. But can you, I know you've got a book about shadow work. You talked about it previously. Can you expand on, share with us, what made you decide to, write a book about what you do, and maybe give us a little bit of a taster of like what people can expect in your book?
I have the funniest story about this. And this is where, like, we've been talking about science so much, but spirituality is just as important to me. So I have a friend, Becky, in the UK, who used to be my old podcast host, and she does Akashic Record sessions for me, and I do shadow work sessions for her, and it's just super fun. So we're doing an Akashic Record session probably in like May 2020. And I'm asking her, like, where am I headed? Like, what's the long-term goal? Because I'm just kind of curious, like, cast that net out really far. And she's like, oh, you're going to be an author. You're going to have like a fuck ton of books. And I started laughing because I literally did not go to get my PhD in psychology because I didn't want to write a doctoral thesis. It was like everything in my bones was like, I cannot write another thing. Like after being in school for as long as I've been in school, after writing my master's thesis, which was only like 30 pages long, I was like, F this. No, thank you. And she was like, no, seriously, like, this is where your spirit guides are all showing me. And you don't have to choose that path. Like with the Akashic Records, it's just, this is a possibility if you want to take it, but this is your most aligned path if you do take it. And I was like, okay, whatever. And she said, it's going to start with a journal and you're just going to, write in the journal every day. I was like, okay, sure. So I went and I bought myself a journal. I actually have the journal here. And she said on the cover, it would say journal. And I was like, all right, I'll just start writing in this thing and see what happens. So I start writing down like random stuff that I have and I hate it. Oh my God, this sucks. So I eventually just put it down because I was like, why am I writing in a journal if I have to transfer it to a Word doc later? This makes no sense. And I forget about it for like a year. And then like a year later, I do a meditation for myself, just a shadow work meditation. And I saw that I was writing down journal prompts in the shadow work meditation. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I think people would really like that. And so I popped into Canva and I started writing down all the shadow work prompts that were coming through and the ones that I just thought to myself, this is something that could really help spur something in people. And by the end of that day, I self-published a shadow work journal called the Shadow Seekers Journal. And it says journal really big on the cover. And she messaged me and said, so you did the journal? And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, remember, I said, you're going to do a journal first, and then the book's going to come. And I was like, okay, sure. The Shadow Seekers Journal ended up being a huge hit and became a bestseller on Amazon. And I was like, this is nuts. So I was like, you know what? Let me just start manifesting a book deal. And like, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm not going to put any work in though. You're supposed to go through a really long process to write a book. You create a book proposal, you query agents, you find an agent who likes your stuff. This could take years. And then they start querying publishing companies. And if they decide to pick it up, then years later, you have a book contract, you write the book, and it goes out into the world. So it's like, let's just see. So with shadow work, once you get all the crap out of the way, manifesting is really easy because there's nothing weighing you down from being able to access future realities. So I just see it very clearly. I see the book in my head. I see the cover. I see myself at the press release. I see myself hosting like book release parties. I can see it so vividly in my mind. And 2 weeks later, I get an email from Barnes & Noble asking me if I would write what they called the book on shadow work, because they'd read some articles that I put and they found me on TikTok and they just think I'm the person to bridge the spirituality and the science. And I was floored. So I was like, that was really fast. Like, I'm a good manifestor, but that was fast.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, I actually had 2 other book deals come through that 2 other places reached out and also offered me a book deal to do the exact same thing. Wow. I understood that I had options, but I felt good about the first one. I took it. And now a year later, shadow work is here and it's insane.
That is such a cool story.
I actually talk about it in the book because for me, shadow work is not heavy. It's not scary like the way that you want to think about it. Like everybody's afraid of the shadow lurking in the corner. I think it's fucking awesome. And I hope I can curse on this. And
you can curse as much as you want.
Great. And at the end of this, I put a whole section here about manifesting because I feel in my bones like shadow work is the secret ingredient for manifestation that nobody talks about. Because if you're trying to access a new future reality, but you have your old unconscious crap weighing you down, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you can get rid of all the old stuff first, all the stuff that's weighing you down, that hypothetical junk closet full of crap, then you can manifest so easily. And I've done it not just with the book. I manifested my house. I've manifested large checks. I manifest whenever I feel like it. And it's easier than we think. So I do talk about that a lot in the book too.
I'm getting your book sold.
I would love to have it.
That is so cool. Oh my goodness. I just love our conversation and I'm just looking at the time. So there's probably just one question that I really want to ask you before we wrap up. And that is, what is setting your soul on fire right now?
I mean, for me, it's the idea. We're recording this a little before this goes out. So the book is still in pre-order time and is about to hit the world. And I got an email yesterday that 2,500 copies are going out. And that lights my soul up Because for me, it's not about anybody knowing who I am. Like, take my name off this. I don't really care. It's about the fact that this healing modality that helped me make my body healthy after cancer, that I've seen help thousands of other people change their lives, heal autoimmune illnesses, feel like their best self, manifest the life that they've always wanted, is about to be in the hands of that many more people. And hopefully they'll tell more people, and it'll just spread like wildfire, because this type of healing can change lives very quickly. And when we realize our potential and how much we can do for ourselves to heal, to feel good every day, to make our life exactly what we want it to be, we're going to change the world.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And like you say, when you do the healing, when you do the work, it's not just you that you're helping generations that follow you.
Literally.
Yeah. So that is just amazing. And I mean, we didn't even go into your how your life changed with finding shadow work, but I just really wanted to learn more about shadow work in this episode. So if you're willing, I'd love to have you on again to talk more about your journey. So thank you so much for sharing your love and wisdom with us today. And if people want to find out more about you or how they can work with you or where they can buy your book, where should they go?
So super simple. I'm in the same place everywhere. My username, my website, everything's the same. And it's IAM, like I am, Danielle Massi. So I am DanielleMassi.com. I am Danielle Massi on TikTok and Instagram. And everything that you need will be there. All the links, all the ways to work with me. Feel free to say hi in my DMs or ask questions if you're like, what the hell were you talking about? I'm always in there answering people anyway. So, and if you're feeling really brave, post it on a comment on TikTok so I can answer it directly and make a whole video about it.
Awesome. I'll have all your details in the show notes so people can reach out to you. Thank you once again, Danielle. It's been such a pleasure having you on.
Of course, looking forward to coming back.
Yeah. Thank you.